They say marriage is a house built on trust. But what happens when the peasant holding the blueprint suddenly asks you to tear out the foundation just to see if the walls still stand? That is where my story begins, not with a fight, not with slam doors or screamed accusations, but with a single sentence spoken so softly almost mystique. Yet it shattered everything. My name is Lauren. I am 43. I've been married to David for 18 years. We have two teenagers, Noah and Dava, a tidy colonial on a cul-de-sac where every lawn is the same shade of green, and from the street we look like a postcard version of happy. Inside, though, we've been quietly disappearing from each other for longer than I care to admit. It was an ordinary Thursday night in late October. The kids were upstairs, headphones on, doors closed. David and I were on the couch, some moment renovation show flicking on the television, neither of us was watching. The silence between us wasn't hostile. It was exhausted, like the AFT alongside. Then he turned, looked at me longer than he had in months, and said the words that throughout our entire life, I've been thinking about something, started, voice steady, almost clinical. I want to watch you. With another man, I left, because what else do you do when the floor drops out from under you? I waited for the punchline, se never chuckle, se got, se look on your face, it never came. I just held my gaze calm, Satan, like there has this moment 100 times in his head. My first thought wasn't betrayal or disgust. It was recognition. For years I'd been fading, turning translucent in my own house. I made things no one noticed, folded clothes that we worn without thanks, scheduled orthodontist appointments and oil changes, and college tours, while my own reflection grew stranger in the mirror. David had stopped touching me the way a man touches a woman he still wants. We were efficient roommates who happened to share a mortgage and a last name. So when he said it, when he offered me this insane, impossible thing, some starved part of me had it as the first real attention I'd been paid in years. It wasn't asking me to leave. It was asking me to stay, just differently. And God help me, I didn't say no, we didn't decide that night. We cycled it for weeks, like an animal sniffing something dangerous but irresistible. I laid out rules, the way he lays out everything. Spreadsheets and boundaries and safety weights, as if this I could be managed like a project timeline. One team only, someone we both knew and trusted. I had to be present. No emotional attachments. We would never speak of it again unless we both agreed that someone turned out to be Ryan David's a college friend. Recently divorced, quiet, kind like, the sort of man who remembers how you take your coffee and texts to check if you got home safe in the rain. I never thought of him that way. Then suddenly I thought of nothing else. David changed everything with the cool detachment of a man scheduling a business trip. A weekend when the kids would be at their cousins. Our house. Friday night. Wine chilled. Lights low. I floated through those days in a dream state, terrified, electric, ashamed, alive. I got no lunch. I wasn't sure I'd ever were. I shaped my legs twice. I stood in front of the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized. Checks flashed. As bright with something that felt dangerously close to hope. Friday came to fest. Ryan arrived the third sharp. Holding a bottle of bread like this was book club. David poured 3 glasses, made small talk about weekend fantasy football while my pals hummed so loudly I was sure they could hear it. When the conversation finally died, David stood, looked at me, and said the sentence that ended the life we didn't know. We don't need to pretend anymore. You both know why I sit here. I took the armchair in the corner of our bedroom, so one we bought when we moved in. So when no one ever sits in and settled back like a deity, waiting for the scene to begin. Ryan looked at me. Not hungry, not predatory, just waiting. Asking without duets if he still wanted this. I thought of David watching. I thought of the years of being unseen. I thought of the version of myself who used to laugh loud and dance barefoot in the kitchen and feel beautiful just because the man he loved could take his eyes off me. Nada. The first kiss was tentative, almost sweet. Ryan tasted like the mints he always carries. His hands were gentle, careful, like he was afraid it'd break. I closed my eyes and tried to lose myself in it, tried to let the sensation drown out the weight of David's stare. For a few minutes it worked. Blood rushed in my ears. My skin woke up after years of sleep. I felt wanted God, I felt wanted and it was intoxicating. Then I opened my eyes, the chair was empty, serum tilted. Ryan felt me stiffen and pulled back, confused. I was already moving, grabbing David's abandoned rope from the foot of the bed, running barefoot down the hallway and out the front door into the cold October night. His SUV was parked at the edge of the driveway, engine off, windows fogged. I could see the outline of him inside, shoulders scaled forward. I tried the door locked. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder, pants stinging against the glass. David, a sound leaked through the window, low, broken, nothing like the man he married. I was crying. not quiet tears, not the single dignified drop you see in movies. Full body saps that shook the steering wheel he was gripping like it was the only salad thing left in se. Well, everything inside me collapsed. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and whispered his name over and over, an apology, a prayer, a plea, and never looked up. After a while the crying stopped, replaced by a silence heavier than any sound. Then the enchanted dove, and he backed out of the driveway without once meeting me as he stood there until set eyes disappeared. Barefoot on the frozen embrace, Robe clutched tight, realizing we had both just learned the same brutal truth. You can intellectualize jealousy. You can negotiate boundaries. You can convince yourself that is big enough to hold anything. But the moment you see the peasant, you swerve to in someone else's arms. Something ancient and feral wakes up and screams Mina Ryan left quietly. I don't remember saying goodbye. I sat on the living room couch until sunrise, still wearing David's robe, staring at the indentation in the armchair where my husband had sat for exactly 4 minutes before his heart overruled his head. I came home the next morning, smelling like cold undergrad. I walked past me without a word, went upstairs and shut the bedroom door. That was the beginning of 6 days tending to weeks of careful choreography. We moved around each other like ghosts, WHO the ones shared a body. I slept in the guest room. Meals waited in shifts. The kids noticed immediately. Noah's hacks grew cautious. I was started asking if we were getting divorced in the same tone. She asked if it might rain. I lied and said we were just tired. They knew I tried to reach him exactly 11. You wanted this, I whispered one night in the kitchen, voice cracking. You planned it. You picked him. You sat in the chair, I looked at me, then really looked, and his eyes was just to see the ever I thought if he could stand it, I said, so quietly you almost missed it. It would probably stop caring. I needed to know how far gone we were. I read, turns out I am not gone at all. Turns out it had exactly as much as he always knew it would. I just didn't expect to be the one WHO couldn't breathe. That was the longest conversation we had for 2 months. I kept waiting for anger, screaming, accusations. Something I could fight against. Instead there was only this best, careful distance. I looked at me like he was a stranger. WHO they had someone else to lap. And so was part, the part that keeps me awake at las 3 a.m. is that for a handful of minutes with Ryan. It had felt like the woman I was at 25, desired, present, real, the guilt of that small, selfish truth is a stone I carry everywhere. We started therapy in January. The paid sessions at fest. Then together. The counsel is kind but unflinching. She makes us say the ugly things out loud. That David, ese, fantasy was never about watching me with someone else. It was about testing whether I would still choose him if given permission not to. That I said yes because being wanted, even in the wrong way, felt better than being invisible. That we both broke something sacred trying to prove it was already broken. Some nights are still unbearable. He reaches for me in his sleep sometimes. Then remembers and pulls away. I catch him staring at the armchair like it is radioactive. I still flinch when I smell Ryan as a cologne in the grocery store. But there are other nights rare. Fresher nights when one of us breaks fast. A hand on a shoulder that doesn't move away. A shared lens across the dinner table that lasts half a second longer than it has in months. Last week he found me crying in the laundry room and, instead of walking past, I stepped inside and closed the door. He didn't hug me. I just stood there while he fell apart, close enough that I could feel the heat of him. When he was done, he handed me a tissue and said, voice rough, we're still here. Lord, that has to count for something. It is not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not even in that way you used to understand it. But it is a crack of light in a house that went dark for a long time. I don't know if we ever make it. Some days I wake up set and we won't. Other days I look at the men sleeping on the far edge of our bed, careful not to touch me. Careful not to leave, and I remember the boy who used to trace constellations on my back and promise me forever. I think forever just turned out to be more complicated than either of us knew how to say, so here is the only truth I have left. Love isn't a house you build once and living safely ever after. It is a house you keep rebuilding, board by board. After every fire, every flat, every time one of you takes a sledgehammer to the walls just to see if the other will help pick up the pieces. We took a sledgehammer to ours. We were still standing in the wreckage, sleeves rolled up, hands bleeding, trying to figure out which pieces are worth salvaging and which ones were at alone before we gave us one. I don't know if this story has a happy ending. I only know it still has an ending being written one careful, painful nailed at time, and if you re-listen into this and some part of you recognizes the ache, the slow vanishing. The desperate bargains, the moment you realize the peasant you love most might be the one who can get you the past, then know you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay whenever instinct screams run. Sometimes the only way back to each other is straight through the mess you made we're still walking. One day, maybe. We look up and realize we're no longer in the ruins. We're just in a house that looks different than we planned, the scarred, imperfect, but ours. Until then, we keep choosing to stay. It is the hardest yes I've ever given, and the only one that still feels like love.